Once upon a time, in a small peaceful village called Kalo, life was simple. The village was surrounded by lush green fields where children played and elders sat under the ancient baobab tree, sharing stories of old. One bright morning, a loud sound of a motorcycle echoed in the village, scattering a few chickens that had been pecking at the ground. A woman named Lisha had arrived from the big city. She was older, elegant, and full of confidence. But what caught everyone's attention was her dressing. She wore tight jeans and a short blouse that showed her belly. Her nails were painted red, her earrings dangled, and she wore a pair of high-heeled shoes that clacked loudly on the ground. The villagers had never seen anything like it. As Leisha walked through the village, the men whispered, "Ah, see beauty," while the women frowned, shaking their heads. The village girls watched her with wide eyes, admiring her confidence. They had never seen someone so bold. Even the village boys stopped their game of marbles to steal glances at her, nudging each other with curiosity. Leisha had come to visit her aunt, Mama Zuri. Mama Zuri was an elder in the village and lived in a small mud house with a thatched roof, surrounded by clay pots filled with herbs and dried fish hanging from the eaves. When Leisha entered, Mama Zuri dropped the broom she was holding and stared. "Leisha!" she cried. "What are you wearing, eh? Are you not ashamed? This is a village, not your Nairobi." Lisha laughed, her voice like the tinkling of broken glass. The sound echoed in the small hut, startling the cat that had been sleeping in the corner. "Auntie, don't worry. They will get used to it." Mama Zuri placed her hands on her waist and sighed deeply. "Hmm, this girl will not kill me. You will see, the elders will start to talk. Behave yourself here, Lisha." Lisha winked and twirled in her high-heeled shoes, making the wooden floor creak beneath her. "Auntie, I'm just here to enjoy myself. Let me breathe." Mama Zuri shook her head, muttering to herself as she went back to her sweeping. The soft rustling of the broom against the ground filled the silence between them. Outside, the villagers couldn't stop talking about Lisha. The men whispered to each other, saying, "Ah, see the short dress. See how her waist swayed. She did not even wear pants." Another added, shaking his head in disbelief, while the women hissed, saying, "This one has come to bring trouble." But the girls, oh the girls, oh the girls, they could not take their eyes off Lisha. They whispered among themselves as they sat by the village well, their hands resting on their water pots. "Who is she? Did you see her head? Did you see her nails?" And so, from the moment Lisha arrived, the once quiet village of Kalo began to buzz like a beehive disturbed by a stick. Even the goats that grazed nearby seemed to sense the excitement in the air. Soon, the village girls began to visit Mama Zuri's house to see Lisha. They were curious about her city life. They sat on woven mats, their bare feet tapping against the ground, eager to hear more. "Auntie Lisha, is it true that in the city, girls don't need to pound yam or fetch water?" One girl asked, her voice filled with wonder. Lisha smiled, adjusting the bracelets on her wrist, that jingled softly. "Of course, in the city, men take care of everything. You only need to look good and enjoy life." The girls gasped in amazement. Lisha showed them her clothes, her makeup, and even her phone, its shiny screen reflecting their wide-eyed faces. She taught them how to walk with confidence and how to speak with charm. "Men love it when you look beautiful and act bold," she said, smoothing her blouse. That's how you get their attention and their money. At first, the girls hesitated. They had been raised to dress modestly and focus on helping their families. But they were mesmerized. When they left Mama Zuri's house, their minds buzzed with new ideas. The scent of Lisha's city perfume clung to them as they walked home, their thoughts racing. They began to practice what Leisha had taught them. They tied their wrappers higher, letting their legs peek out, and painted their lips red, using the dye meant for ceremonies. They even practiced walking like Leisha, the steps bold and confident, though some wobbled like baby goats, learning to stand at first. They were careful, only dressing up when their parents weren't watching. But as the days passed, their boldness grew. The once shy and modest girls of Kalo now carried themselves with an air of confidence that left the villagers whispering, "Hey, what is happening to our daughters?" One woman asked, clutching her chest as she watched her daughter adjust her wrapper. "It's that city woman, Lisha," another replied. "She has bewitched them." But the girls didn't care. In their eyes, Lisha was a queen, and they were her apprentices. The village of Kylo was beginning to change, one confident step at a time. Even the village boys took notice, their eyes lingering longer than before. One day, Lisha called a few girls to her aunt's house. She said she had a plan to help them get rich. They sat around her, their hands resting on their laps, waiting eagerly. "You see, men like to spoil beautiful women with gifts," Lisha explained, flipping her hair back. "All you have to do is spend time with them. They will buy you clothes, shoes, and even give you money." The girls exchanged glances, their fingers tracing patterns on the dusty floor. "Listen," Lisha said, her tone serious. "Now men are like goats. They follow wherever you lead them. All you have to do is look good, speak sweetly, and they will shower you with gifts, clothes, shoes, money. You can have it all." But Gina hesitated, her fingers twisting a loose thread on her wrapper. "What if our parents find out?" Leisha laughed, her voice low and smooth. "That's where you must be smart. Tell them you're going to fetch water or help at the market. Be careful, and no one will know. Just make sure you don't stay out too long." The girls fidgeted, their doubts written on their faces. A warm breeze passed through the narrow space where they stood, carrying the scent of roasted maize from a nearby hut. "But we were taught not to do such things," another girl whispered, her fingers nervously twisting the edge of her wrapper. Lisha's smile faded, and her eyes grew sharp, glinting in the dim lantern light. "Do you want to live your whole life pounding yam and fetching water, or do you want to live like queens, wearing the finest clothes and eating the best food? Imagine having golden bracelets jingling on your wrists and perfumes that smell like flowers." Her words sank into their hearts like stones dropped in a river. Slowly they nodded. Lisha's plan was daring, but the promise of a better life sparkled before them, like the morning sun. The next day, the first brave girls followed Lisha's advice. They tied their wrappers high, painted their lips red, and walked boldly toward the nearby towns. The men they met were captivated by their beauty and confidence, their eyes lingering on the way the girls moved. They returned to the village with shiny gifts, colorful wrappers, beads, and even money. The other girls watched in awe, their fingers itching to touch the silken fabrics. "Where did you get that?" they asked, pointing to the new clothes, their voices hushed with wonder. The girls giggled, but didn't answer, their silence only fueling the curiosity. Instead, they simply twirled, letting their new outfits shimmer under the sun. One by one, more girls visited Lisha, eager to join her club. At night, when the village was asleep, they would sneak out in small groups, their laughter soft as the rustle of leaves in the wind. The cool night air carried their whispered excitement as they made their way beyond the village. By morning, they returned, their hands full of treasures and their faces glowing with pride. But the changes didn't go unnoticed. Parents began whispering about their daughter's boldness, their keen eyes watching closely. What is going on? They asked each other. Where are they getting these things? And why do they no longer wake early to help with the morning chores? And yet, the girls were careful. They smiled sweetly, fetched water when asked, and hid their new possessions under their beds, careful to cover them with their old clothes. They lived double lives, learning quickly how to keep secrets and move in silence. The once simple and modest village of Kalo was beginning to shimmer with the allure of city life, all thanks to Leisha and her secret club. The air in the village felt different charged, alive with the whisper of change. As time passed, the village elders noticed changes in the girls. They no longer helped with chores or attended the evening gatherings. They wore makeup and walked around with an air of confidence that unsettled the villagers. Their laughter, once innocent and free, now carried something else, something unknown and thrilling. Whispers began to spread. What is happening to our girls? An elder woman asked as she sat under the baobab tree, fanning herself slowly. It's that city woman, Lisha. She has spoiled them, another replied, shaking her head. Mama Zuri tried to talk to Lisha, her voice gentle yet firm. Lisha, the villagers are complaining. You need to stop influencing these girls before it's too late. But Lisha only smiled, adjusting the golden chain around her neck. Auntie, they are just jealous. I'm teaching the girls to enjoy life. What is wrong with that? They deserve more than this village can offer. Mama Zuri sighed, feeling helpless. She had seen many things in her life, but this was something new. One day, the secret life of one of the girls, Gina, came to light. Gina had started dressing boldly and meeting men, just like Leisha had taught. But now, her belly had begun to swell. She was pregnant. Her mother noticed her sickness one morning and confronted her, her face lined with worry. What is this? Mama Annie asked sharply, her voice cutting through the quiet morning. Her eyes darted to Gina's belly. Stand up. Let me see you properly. Gina hesitated but obeyed, her hands trembling as she rose to her feet. Mama Annie stared at her heart pounding like the drum beats during festivals. She took a step closer, her voice now shaking. Gina, tell me the truth. Are you pregnant? Gina's lips quivered and tears began to stream down her face. Mama, I speak. Mama Annie shouted, her voice rising like thunder, sending birds fluttering from the trees. Gina fell to her knees, sobbing, her body shaking with the force of her cries. I don't know who the father is, she whispered. Mama Annie gasped and staggered back, clutching her chest as if struck by lightning. Her breath came in ragged gasps. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by Gina's soft cries. Then, like a dam breaking, Mama Annie wailed a loud, piercing sound that echoed through the village, bouncing off the mud walls of the huts. Ah, my daughter has brought shame to my house. My ancestors. What have I done to deserve this? The neighbors, hearing the commotion, hurried over, their faces filled with concern and curiosity. What is happening? They asked, their voices overlapping in the gathering crowd. Mama Annie pointed a trembling finger at Gina, her lips quivering. She is pregnant, she cried, and she doesn't even know who the father is. The news spread through Kalo like wildfire. Soon, the entire village was buzzing with gossip, their voices weaving through the air like smoke from the cooking fires. Women whispered behind their hands, shaking their heads in disapproval. Men laughed, mocking Gina's disgrace, their voices tinged with both amusement and condemnation. This is what happens when girls abandon their values, an elder woman said, shaking her walking stick. She is a lesson for all. Shameless child, a man muttered. Her parents must be so proud. Gina's shame became the talk of the village. Her friends avoided her, their faces turned away whenever she walked by. Mothers used her as an example to warn the daughters. If you follow that city woman's ways, they said, you will end up like Gina. But what the villagers didn't know was that their own daughters were quietly walking the same dangerous path. They hid their secrets well, sneaking out at night and returning with gifts. Gina's story was a cautionary tale, but it didn't stop the whispers, the sneaking or the lies. Gina stayed in her family's compound, her head bowed in shame, while Mama Annie wept day and night. In the shadows, the village girls watched and whispered among themselves. They pitied Gina, but fear didn't stop their desires. And so, the secrets of Kalo continued to grow, hidden beneath painted lips and bold steps, and bold steps. Then, one day, disaster struck the village. The skies over Kalo grew darker, as if the gods themselves had turned their faces away. The once lush farms, with their rows of yam and cassava, began to wither. Leaves turned yellow, stalks bent low, and the earth cracked under the weight of dryness. The goats that used to roam the village, bleating loudly, now stood still, their ribs poking through their skin. Worst of all, a strange sickness crept into the village, leaving many bedridden with fevers that no herbs could cure. What is happening to us? Mama Ebon cried as she stared at her barren farm. Yesterday my yam leaves were green. Today they are like ash. In another corner of the village, a man slapped his goat's side, hoping it would give milk, but the animal stood there lifeless. Even the goats have betrayed us, he muttered, his voice heavy with despair. As the sickness spread, the people's fear grew. Children wailed, and the elderly whispered among themselves. This is not ordinary, one of them murmured. Something has angered the gods. The elders, their faces shadowed with worry, gathered under the big Iroko tree. They spoke in hushed tones, their staffs planted firmly in the ground like old trees refusing to bow to the storm. Finally, the oldest elder, Patari, raised his hand. This matter is beyond us, he said, his voice firm. We must visit Baba Zuri, the oracle. The villagers murmured in agreement. Baba Zuri was known far and wide for his wisdom and connection to the gods. He lived on the edge of the forest, in a hut surrounded by charms and ancient carvings. The next morning, the elders and some villagers made their way to Baba Zuri's shrine. The journey was silent. save for the occasional cough or whisper of prayer. When they arrived, Baba Zuri sat cross-legged on a mat, his long white beard flowing like a river. His eyes, sharp as an eagle's, seemed to pierce through their very souls. "Speak," Baba Zuri said, his voice deep and commanding. "Why have you come?" P stepped forward. "Baba, our village is in trouble. The crops are dying. The goats give no milk, and a strange sickness has taken hold of us. We fear the gods are angry, but we do not know why." Baba Zuri closed his eyes and began to chant. The villagers watched, their hearts pounding like festival drums. After what felt like an eternity, Baba Zuri opened his eyes and spoke. "The gods are indeed angry," he said. "Your village has abandoned the ways of purity and tradition. The young maidens have turned away from their path. Their actions have polluted the land." The villagers gasped. Some looked down in shame, while others exchanged nervous glances. "What must we do, Baba?" Patari asked, his voice trembling. Baba Zuri's eyes darkened as he spoke. "To cleanse the village and lift the curse, the gods demand a sacrifice. 2 virgin maidens must carry an offering of white kola nuts, a ram, and a calabash of palm oil across the river Omi. Only then will the gods forgive your people." A heavy silence fell over the group. The river Omi was wide and deep, its current strong enough to drag a man under. And now 2 virgins had to face it to save the village. "The maidens must be pure," Baba Zuri added. "If they are not, they will not survive the crossing." The villagers nodded solemnly, their hearts heavy. They returned to Kalo with Baba Zuri's message, ready to announce the test. But deep down, many wondered if any of their daughters would pass. The once proud parents who had boasted of their daughters' purity now felt the weight of shame creeping into their hearts. As the news spread, the village braced for the ultimate test of truth and the reckoning that would follow. The following day, the girls dressed in white wrappers walked nervously to the edge of the river. Their bare feet touched the cool, damp sand, and they shivered, not from the cold, but from fear. Each knew the truth that lay hidden in their hearts. The first girl, Gina, stepped forward. Her father, standing proudly in the crowd, shouted, "That's my daughter. She is as pure as fresh palm wine." Gina hesitated, her hands trembling before wading into the river. The sun hung low, casting golden light upon the rippling water. At first, the water was calm, lapping gently against her ankles. The coolness sent a shiver up her spine, but as she moved deeper, the current grew stronger, swirling around her legs like unseen hands. She struggled, her legs kicking wildly until, suddenly, she disappeared beneath the surface. The crowd gasped as the river swallowed her whole. Women clutched their chests, while children hid behind their mothers. 2 men rushed in and pulled her out, coughing and sputtering, but alive. The villagers murmured, their confidence beginning to crack, a shadow of doubt creeping into their hearts. The second girl, Mala, stepped forward, her face pale as the full moon. Her mother clasped her hands together, whispering, "The gods will protect her," hands together, whispering, "The gods will protect her." A light breeze rustled the trees, carrying her words away. Mala entered the river, her steps unsteady. She swam for a while, her arms slicing through the water like a skilled fisherwoman. But just as she neared the middle, the current pulled her under. She too was dragged out, gasping for air, her chest heaving with effort. One by one, the girls tried, and one by one, they failed. Each time a girl disappeared beneath the water, the murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Some shifted nervously on their feet, others exchanged wary glances. What is happening? One man cried, his voice laced with disbelief. Are none of them pure? The parents who had once stood tall now hung their heads in shame. Whispers turned to accusations, the tension in the air thick enough to choke on. Our daughters have brought disgrace to this village, one elder shouted, his voice shaking with anger. They have turned away from the ways of our ancestors. The elders turned to Lisha, who stood apart from the crowd, watching silently. A hush fell over the villagers as Patari pointed his staff at her, his voice thunderous. This is your doing. You came to this village and filled our daughters' heads with your city ways. The crowd erupted. The smell of dust and sweat thickened as tempers flared. Yes, she is to blame, they shouted. She has poisoned our girls. Leisha stepped forward, her face calm despite the storm of anger around her. Her shadow stretched long against the ground as the sun dipped lower. I did not force anyone, she said, her voice steady, carrying across the square. They came to me because they wanted to learn. If they chose to abandon your ways, perhaps it is because they wanted more than this village could offer. They wanted a taste of freedom. Freedom? Patari bowed his staff, striking the ground with a loud thud. You call this freedom? Disgrace and impurity. The gods are angry, and it is your doing. Leisha stepped forward, her voice rising above the crowd's noise like a drumbeat in the night. Your daughters are not children. They made their own choices. If you think they were pure before, maybe you didn't know them as well as you thought. The crowd gasped, and a murmur of shock ripped through the air. Lisha's words struck like the crack of a whip, but her boldness only fueled the villagers' anger. How dare you insult us? One man roared. You have destroyed our pride, and you stand here unrepentant. Leisha must leave. Another shouted, and the crowd roared in agreement. Mama Zuri pushed her way to the front, her face edged with sorrow. The firelight flickered in her eyes as she spoke. Leisha, please, she said softly, tears pooling in her eyes. You've done enough harm. It is better if you go. Leisha turned to her aunt, her defiance faltering for the first time. The weight of the moment settled on her shoulders. Auntie, I didn't mean for things to get this bad. I just wanted to show them a different way. Mama Zuri shook her head, her tears spilling over like raindrops on dry earth. You came with good intentions, but look around. The village is in ruins. The elders blame you. The parents blame you. Staying here will only bring more trouble. The words pierced Lisha's heart like a knife. She looked around at the faces she once saw as curious and admiring. Now, they were twisted with hatred and disappointment. She took a deep breath and nodded. Fine, she said quietly. I will leave. Mama Zuri helped her pack her few belongings, her hands trembling with sadness. The small mud house, once filled with laughter, was now heavy with silence. When it was time to go, Leisha hugged her aunt tightly, the scent of earth and firewood clinging to them. I'm sorry, Auntie, she whispered, her voice breaking like fragile pottery. Mama Zuri wiped her tears and nodded. Go, my child. I pray you find peace." With her bag slung over her shoulder, Leisha stepped out into the square. The villagers watched as she walked away. The villagers watched as she walked away, the angry murmurs fading into the distance. Her steps were steady, but her heart was a storm of emotions, anger at their blindness, regret for the chaos she had caused, and sadness for the life she was leaving behind. As she reached the edge of the village, Leisha paused and looked back one last time. The once familiar paths and faces now felt like strangers. With a heavy sigh, she turned and walked on, disappearing into the horizon. As the villagers stood in silence, their hearts torn between relief and sorrow, the village of Kalo, still burdened by the shame and wrath of the gods, fell silent after Lisha's departure. The elders, their faces lined with worry, gathered under the ancient Iroko tree to plan the purification. Patari, with his staff firmly in hand, spoke first. "We must cleanse this village," he declared, his voice firm. "The gods must see our remorse." The other elders nodded. Plans were made to restore harmony with the gods and the ancestors. Early the next morning, the villagers assembled at the shrine of Baba Zuri. Offerings of white kola nuts, palm oil, and a spotless ram were laid at the feet of the sacred statue. Baba Zuri led the prayers, chanting in a deep, rhythmic voice that echoed across the silent crowd. The girls, dressed in plain white wrappers, stood apart from the villagers, their heads bowed, their faces pale with shame. As the elders prayed, the girls felt the weight of their actions pressing on their hearts like heavy stones. "We are sorry," Gina whispered to herself, tears streaming down her cheeks. The ceremony lasted 3 days. On the first day, Baba Zuri and the elders poured libations at the riverbank, calling on the gods to forgive the village. On the second day, a procession carried the offerings through the village, with the girls following behind in silence. On the final day, the villagers gathered to witness the sacrifices: a ram, a calabash of oil, and a bundle of white kola nuts offered to the gods at the sacred grove. The elders spoke words of repentance. "We have strayed from the ways of our ancestors," Patari said, his voice trembling. "Forgive us and cleanse our land." The girls, standing before the elders, took turns apologizing to their parents. "Mama, Baba, I have brought shame to you," Gina said, falling to her knees. "I promise never to stray again." One by one, the girls vowed to abandon Ebon, the ways Lisha had taught them. The villagers, though hurt, forgave them. Slowly, the weight of anger and shame began to lift. As the final prayer was spoken, the air in Kalo felt lighter, as if the gods had accepted their plea. In the days and weeks that followed, life in Kalo began to return to its old rhythm. The crops grew green again, the goats gave milk, and the strange sickness vanished like a morning mist under the sun. The villagers worked together, rebuilding trust and unity among themselves. The girls, now humbled, returned to their chores with renewed dedication. They fetched water, pounded yam, and joined their mothers at the market. Their laughter, once bold and careless, became soft and joyful, rooted in the peace of living right. The elders, having seen the near destruction of their village, took it upon themselves to guide the youth more carefully. "We must never let our children forget this lesson," Patari said during an evening gathering. "Freedom without values leads to ruin." The parents, too, became more attentive. Mothers told their daughters the story of Lisha, warning them of the dangers of chasing fleeting pleasures. Fathers reminded their sons to respect tradition and the ways of the ancestors. No pants, no problem, the villagers began to say, but lose your values and you lose yourself. As the years passed, Lisha's story became a cautionary tale, told by firesides and under the shade of the Iroko tree. The name Leisha was spoken with a mixture of regret and reverence, a reminder of how easily one person's influence could shake the foundation of an entire village. And so, Kalo thrived again, holding tightly to the values that had kept it strong for generations. The lesson of Lisha was not forgotten, and the village stood as a testament to the power of unity, tradition, and the wisdom of learning from past mistakes. The story of Kalo teaches us a powerful lesson about the importance of values, tradition, and the consequences of straying from them. While the allure of a different way of life may seem tempting, true fulfillment and peace come from honoring our heritage, respecting our elders, and making wise choices. The villagers of Kalo learned that freedom without values leads to ruin and that every action carries consequences. This story serves as a reminder to all of us to cherish our roots, respect the wisdom of those who came before us, and be mindful of the influences we allow into our lives. In the end, the strength of a community lies in its unity and adherence to the principles that have sustained it for generations. Thank you for watching my channel. If you enjoyed this lesson, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned for more interesting and meaningful stories coming your way. See you in the next video. Right before Christmas, these three beautiful college students followed their friends home for just a small party. Little did they know they'd become a December sacrifice. This is a great lesson for young people of nowadays. Here's what happened. It was a quiet morning as usual. The air was crisp, and the soft crowing of roosters signaled the start of the day. Mama Ebon woke early, her heart heavy like a stone in a river. She knelt on her mat and began to pray, her voice rising like the morning crow, calling her children to join her. Ebon too, come and pray, she called, her voice filled with both urgency and warmth. Ebon, her beautiful 21-year-old daughter, who was in her final year in the university, knelt by her side, stifling a yawn. After the prayers, Mama Ebon turned to her, her voice sharp and firm like a mother's hand protecting her chicks. Ebon, listen to me. Don't follow anybody out today, no matter what, she said, her eyes as wide as the morning sky glistening with concern. But Mama, I don't. Bun began to speak, but Mama Ebon cut her off. Don't argue with me, you hear me. Don't follow anybody out today. If they like, let them beg you or promise you heaven and earth. Say no. Mama Ebon repeated the warning again and again, her voice rising like a drumbeat in the village square. Diban nodded her head, moving like a lizard on a hot rock. I won't, Mama, she promised, though her mind was already elsewhere, her thoughts drifting to the plans she had made with her friends. The morning chores were done, and Ebon dressed in her neat clothes. She tied her scarf carefully, waved her mother goodbye, and stepped out into the bright day. The warm sun kissed her skin as her steps were quick and light, like a bird hopping to freedom. At school, Ebon met her two best friends, Fola and Amina. They stood out like peacocks in a flock of hens, dressed as if they were going to a grand festival. Fola wore a bright dress with patterns of blooming flowers, while Amina's skirt sparkled like the stars, catching the sunlight with every movement. Ebon, you're looking fresh this morning, Fola said, laughing as she playfully flicked a strand of her hair. Yes, fresh like morning dew, Amina added, her smile as wide as the river. The three friends stood together laughing and talking, unaware that the day was about to take a turn darker than the bottom of a clay pot. The soft rustling of the nearby trees and the cheerful chatter of students created a lively backdrop. Have you heard? Fola said, her eyes sparkling like sunlight on water. Classes have been cancelled until next year. Ah, so my transport fare today was wasted. Ebon sighed, shaking her head and clutching her bag tightly. Don't mind them, Amina said with a grin, her voice carrying a mischievous edge. But don't worry, we won't let the day go to waste. Ebon's brow furrowed. What do you mean? She asked, tilting her head curiously. We're going to a party, Fola announced, her hands clapping together with excitement. A small one, nothing serious. Come with us. Ebon. Ebon froze, her mother's warning ringing in her ears, like the sound of a warning gong. I can't, she said, shaking her head, her voice suddenly subdued. I need to study. I can't just waste my time. Fola rolled her eyes dramatically, and Amina leaned closer, her voice soft and teasing. It's just a small party, Ebon. No harm will come. Come on, we'll just dance, eat, and come back. Don't be boring. No, I can't. Ebon started, but her friends cut her off. Ah, Ebon, are you now a grandmother? Live a little, Fola said, laughing and lightly nudging her arm. Okay, okay. Ebon finally agreed, her voice low like a beaten drum. But only for a little while. Not long after, the sound of loud music filled the air. Kunle, Amina's boyfriend, arrived in a shiny car, the music booming like thunder. The car gleamed under the afternoon sun, and the rhythmic beat of the speakers seemed to energize everyone nearby. Raji and Bayo, his friends, were with him, their grins wide and confident, their clothes sharply pressed. Let's go, girls, Kunle called out, his voice full of excitement, his eyes darting toward Amina with a sly smile. The girls climbed into the car, their laughter rising like birds into the sky. Ebon sat quietly, her heart uneasy, but her friend's joy was infectious. The car sped off, the music loud, and the mood high as they headed toward what they thought would be a night of fun. The house was full of life, music blasting like the beating of drums during a festival. Laughter and cheers filled the air as people danced in pairs, their bodies swaying like trees in the wind. A faint scent of roasted meat and perfumes lingered, blending into the festive atmosphere. Ebon, shy at first, soon found herself dancing with Bayo, while Fola was paired with Raji and Amina with Kunle. The friends laughed and danced, their joy bubbling over like palm wine in a full calabash. After a while, Kunle clapped his hands to get everyone's attention. Friends, it's time for a special treat. I have something planned just for us, he said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. His voice carried a hint of something unspoken, but the group, fueled by excitement, didn't notice. Excitement rippled through the group as Kunle led them outside. The girls, giggling and curious, followed as he drove them to a nearby hotel. The table was already set, with plates of steaming food and bottles of drink shining under the soft light. "Eat, my queens," Kunle said with a flourish, pulling out chairs for the girls. The girls ate and drank, their laughter echoing through the room like the melody of a happy song. Meanwhile, far away, Mama Ebon sat in her market stall, her heart heavy like a sack of stones. Ebon should have been back by now. She tried to call her, but the phone rang and rang with no answer. Why won't she pick up? Mama Ebon muttered, her palms sweaty as she dialed again, her spirit restless like the wind before a storm. Back at the hotel, Ebon's phone buzzed on the table, unnoticed in the noise and excitement. She didn't hear it. The music was too loud and the night too enchanting. But suddenly, the enchantment began to fade. Ebon's head felt heavy, like someone had poured sand into it. Her vision blurred, and her legs wobbled. She grabbed the edge of the table, but the room spun faster and faster and faster. Fola slumped first, then Amina. Ebon fought to stay awake, but her strength gave way, and darkness swallowed her whole. When Ebon woke up, she was no longer in the hotel. The air was cold and smelled of damp earth. She looked around and saw cracked walls and broken windows. They were in an uncompleted building deep in the middle of nowhere. Her hands and legs were tied with thick ropes. She turned her head and saw Fola and Amina beside her, also tied and unconscious. Fear gripped her heart like the claws of a wild beast. Where are we? She whispered, her voice trembling like leaves in the Harmattan breeze. Wake up, Ebon whispered, urgently, nudging them with her elbow. Her voice trembled like dry leaves in the Harmattan wind. The girls stirred slowly, their eyes wide with fear, as they took in their surroundings. In front of them stood Kunle, Raji, and Bayo, their cheerful faces replaced with cold, emotionless stares. Behind them, an old man emerged from the shadows. His presence filled the room like smoke, choking and oppressive. He held knives of different shapes and sizes, their blades gleaming in the dim light. Beside him was a calabash, empty but waiting. Do not shout, Kunle warned, his voice low and dangerous. Ebon and her friends began to cry, the tears falling like rain as they begged for mercy. But the captors didn't flinch. The old man's eyes burned like fire as he stepped closer, the air thick with the promise of evil. The room was silent except for the dripping sound of water from the ceiling. The old man stood tall, his eyes sharp like the blade of a hunter's machete. His voice, deep and strange, echoed in the darkness. Pick a knife, he commanded, holding out the gleaming weapons. Anyone who refuses will be flogged until their skin peels like yam. Ebon and her friends cried harder, their sobs filling the empty space. Please, we didn't do anything wrong. Fola begged, her voice trembling like a frightened bird. Silence! The old man bared his voice like thunder. He motioned to Kunle and his friends, who stepped forward with ropes in hand. The girls screamed and struggled, but the ropes held them tightly. The old man brought out a small black bottle filled with a dark, foul-smelling liquid. He poured it into a wooden cup and held it to Amina's lips. Drink, he said, his voice calm but cold. Amina shook her head, her lips trembling. No, please, she begged. But Kuno grabbed her head, forcing the liquid into her mouth. She swallowed, her body shaking as tears streamed down her face. Moments later, Amina's body stiffened, her eyes wide with fear. She fell to the ground, lifeless. The old man stepped forward, raising a sharp knife. With one swift motion, he cut off her head. Blood poured into the calabash like a river, and Kunle and his friends chanted strange words, their voices blending with the old man's. Ebon screamed, her cries piercing the air like a broken flute. "No, no!" she shouted, her body twisting in the ropes. "Next," the old man said, turning his eyes to Ebon. They forced the wooden cup to her lips, but Ebon fought with all her strength. The bitter liquid burned her throat, but as it reached her stomach, she vomited it out. Again and again. They made her drink, and each time she retched, her body rejecting the poison. "She is strong," the old man muttered, his brows furrowing. He turned to Fola, who was too weak to fight. She drank the potion with trembling hands, her body collapsing moments later. The old man wasted no time, raising his knife and cutting off her head. Blood filled the calabash once more, the red liquid reflecting the flickering light of a candle. Ebon's heart shattered like a broken pot. Her tears fell endlessly as she watched her friends die before her eyes. "Why did I come here?" she whispered to herself, her voice choked with regret. "Force her again," the old man commanded. Kunli and Raji held Ebon down, pouring more of the liquid into her mouth. But no matter how much they gave her, she vomited it all out, her body refusing to give in. The old man finally stepped back, his face hard like a rock. "She cannot be killed," he declared, his voice heavy with anger. "She will be made useless instead. Let her live as a shell of herself." Ebon's body was weak from the beating, her tears mixing with the dirt on her face. She sat in the darkness, her soul crushed, as the old man prepared for the next stage of his ritual. The market was bustling with life, but Mama Ebon couldn't shake the unease in her chest. Her hands trembled as she arranged yams on her wooden table. She wiped the sweat from her forehead and picked up her phone again. "Ebon, pick up," she whispered, dialing her daughter's number for the 10th time. The phone didn't ring. It was switched off. Mama Ebon's heart raced, beating like a drum in her chest. Her mind swelled with thoughts darker than a stormy night. "God, please protect my child," she prayed under her breath, her lips moving quickly. She looked around, but the market's noise drowned her thoughts. Far away, Kunle and his friends followed the old man's final instructions. Ebon, barely alive, was dumped out of the car by the roadside opposite the market. Her clothes were torn, her body bruised, and her skin smeared with blood. She lay motionless, like a rag doll discarded in the dirt. As the car drove off at a very high speed, a market woman was the first to see her. She screamed, dropping the basket of tomatoes she was carrying. "Ah, somebody come and see. They just dumped her." People rushed to the scene, their voices rising like a swarm of bees. "Who is she? What happened to her?" They shouted, their faces filled with fear. Mama Ebon's stall was close to the roadside. She heard the commotion and ran toward the crowd, her feet moving faster than they ever had before. When she saw the girl lying there, her knees buckled, and she let out a wail that pierced the heavens. "Ebon, my child." Ebon opened her eyes weakly. Her voice was faint, like a whisper carried away by the wind. "Mama," she managed to say before collapsing into Mama Ebon's arms. Mama Ebon's tears flowed freely as she cradled her daughter. Her once bright Ebon was now a shadow of herself, her body battered and her spirit broken. Without wasting a moment, Mama Ebon lifted her daughter, her strength fueled by desperation. Make way, she shouted, pushing through the crowd. She carried Ebon straight to the prophet's house, her mind racing with prayers. God, don't let my child die. Please, don't let this be the end, she whispered, her voice trembling as she approached the prophet's door. The prophet, a man with a long beard and eyes that seemed to see beyond the physical, opened the door before she could knock. Bring her in, he said softly, his tone calm but serious. Mama Ebon laid Ebon on the mat, her hands shaking as she explained what had happened. The prophet nodded, his eyes scanning the fragile girl before him. This is not an ordinary battle, he said, his voice heavy, but with prayer she will live. Mama Ebon knelt beside her daughter, her hands clasped tightly. Do whatever you can, prophet. Save my child. Her voice broke with emotion as tears streamed down her face. Outside, the crowd murmured, their whispers spreading the story of the bloodied girl found by the road. The market, once alive with laughter and trade, was now hushed with fear. Meanwhile, something even more terrible had happened elsewhere. After dumping Ebon, the car roared down the dusty road, music blaring as Kunle and his friends laughed like hyenas after a feast. This December will be the best ever, Kunle shouted, gripping the steering wheel with pride. Raji leaned back in the seat, a grin plastered on his face. We'll have everything we've ever dreamed of, riches, power, everything, Raji added, nodding as he sipped from a bottle. But their celebration didn't last long. Just 3 minutes from the market, the car sped around a bend, and out of nowhere, a massive truck loomed in front of them like a wall of doom. The crash was sudden and brutal, like thunder striking the earth. The car crumpled like paper, its music silenced forever. Raji died on the spot, his body lifeless in the wreckage. Kunle screamed in pain as blood poured from his legs, now crushed beyond saving. One of his eyes was gone, leaving his face disfigured. Bayo groaned, his arm severed, hanging limply as he cried out in agony. News of the accident spread through the town like wildfire. Whispers turned to shouts as people connected the dots. It's them, someone said. The boys who dumped that girl at the market. Their evil deeds have caught up with them, another muttered, shaking his head. Back at the prophet's house, Ebon lay on a mat, her breathing steady but weak. Mama Ebon sat beside her, watching as the prophet prayed and placed herbs on her wounds. Slowly, Ebon's eyes opened, and she began to speak in a broken voice, like a bird with a wounded wing. They killed them, she whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. Fola and Amina, they cut off their heads. I should have listened to you, Mama. Mama Ebon's heart broke anew as she listened to her daughter's harrowing tale. The prophet placed a hand on Ebon's forehead and spoke softly. Her recovery will be slow, but she will live. The scars of the soul may never fade, but she is strong. The town buzzed with the story of the crash and Ebon's survival. People spoke of divine justice, of how evil can never escape punishment. The police came quickly, dragging Kunle and Bayo out of the wrecked car, broken and battered. They were taken to the hospital, before being thrown into prison. Their dreams of wealth had turned to ashes. Kunle sat in his cell, his legs gone, and his single eye staring at the wall. Bayo clutched the stump where his arm used to be, his head bowed in regret. Why did we do it? Kunle muttered. We should have stayed poor. The once proud boys now faced a life of misery, their actions having destroyed everything. At the prophet's house, Ebon recovered slowly. She could no longer walk without help, and her voice was faint, like a shadow of its former self. The prophet told Mama Ebon, your daughter will live, but she will carry these scars for the rest of her life. Let her story be a lesson. Mama Ebon wept, holding her daughter close. At least you are alive, she whispered. The town learned from Ebon's tragedy. Parents warned their children to listen and avoid temptations. Young girls vowed to be more cautious, their laughter now tinged with the memory of Ebon's tale. The December that began with joy ended in sorrow. Fola and Amina were gone, Kunle and Bayo were ruined, and Ebon would never be the same. Her story became a warning that echoed through the town. Be careful who you follow home. Thank you for joining me on this emotional journey through Ebon's harrowing tale. Stories like these remind us of the consequences of our choices and the resilience of the human spirit even in the darkest times. Let Ebon's experience serve as a powerful lesson to always stay vigilant and value the people who truly care for us. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more thought-provoking narratives. Together, let's learn, reflect, and grow. Kimi was very pressed after she finished eating her food and urgently needed to ease herself, so she asked the waitress where the restroom was located. She was directed to the restroom. However, when she got there, it was already occupied by another customer. Kemi, who couldn't hold it any longer, noticed a swinging door that led to the kitchen. Her eyes darted around, and seeing no one paying attention, she decided to peep through the door. When she peered through the swinging door, she couldn't make much sense of what she saw, so out of desperation, she went through the door into the kitchen. What she saw shocked her to the bones and made her want to vomit. Everything was dirty and irritating. There were a lot of dirty dishes piled up beside the cooking area, some of which had food scraps still stuck to them, giving off a pungent smell. Raw meat was left out in the open, with dozens of flies perching on it, buzzing continuously. The women who were cooking the food had dirty hair tied up in disheveled scarves, and their white aprons were stained with all sorts of things, oils, sauces, and even what looked like bloodstains from the meat. It looked as if those aprons hadn't been washed for a very long time. The whole floor was sticky and filthy, with puddles of murky water and leftover food scraps scattered around, and there were rats roaming freely all over the place, scurrying in and out of sight. Then Kimi saw the chief cook, a very fat dark woman wearing a sleeveless gown. Her teeth were very brown, stained from years of neglect, and the hair on her armpits was bushy and disgusting. Kemi watched as the fat woman scratched her dirty armpit with the spoon she was using to cook and still used the same spoon to stir the soup without washing it. Kemi felt her stomach churn violently. Kimi felt utterly disgusted and almost wanted to throw up. She held her stomach with one hand and used the other hand to cover her nose and mouth because the smell and odor in the kitchen were unbearable. She quickly turned around, pushing through the swinging door to get back into the restaurant, feeling disappointed and irritated at the same time. When she stepped outside, the fresh air hit her face, and she rushed over to a corner, bending over to a corner, bending over to vomit everything she had just eaten. She couldn't believe what she had just witnessed. Kimi grew up buying food from different restaurants because she was too lazy to cook at home. She knew all the best and latest restaurants and buka joints in the state and had eaten at each one of them. Every night, she would pick a new restaurant to patronize, priding herself on knowing the best spots in town. Her friend, Amaka, would often try to advise her against eating out all the time. Amaka would say, "Don't you know it is cheaper and safer to buy things at the market and cook for yourself? Why do you always prefer to waste money on buying cooked food outside the house?" But Kemi refused to listen because she didn't see anything wrong with buying food outside. She was already used to eating out because that was how she was brought up. When she was still very little, her parents were always busy with work and business, so they didn't have time for the children or chores at home. Mr. and Mrs. Adebayo were fortunate to have 3 children, whom they named Kemi, Chidi, and Ngozi. But as soon as the children started going to school, their parents stopped giving them the needed attention. Whenever they were going to school in the morning, their parents would give them money to buy food at school. When they returned home in the afternoon, they would have to buy lunch from a nearby food vendor. At night, they would buy dinner and eat before their mother and father returned from work. Kemi, the eldest daughter, took up the role of a mother in the home. Kemi couldn't cook because her mother didn't teach her. Their father was a well-known driver who traveled a lot, hauling goods across different states. Most times, he would be on the road away from home for 2 or 3 months. He wasn't bothered about home. All he cared about was the financial aspect of the family. Their mother was a full-time businesswoman whose shop was located in the heart of the market, so she was always busy from dawn to dusk. She would leave home very early to escape traffic and return when the children were already asleep. Kimi grew up learning to take care of herself and her siblings in the absence of her parents. She got used to the street life and its way of living. The 3 children grew up preferring junk and street food over freshly homemade meals. Before Kimi graduated from university, she lost her father in a tragic accident. Her siblings also started following their mother to the market to help her with sales because the business was booming and she needed more help as she grew older. After Kimi graduated from university, she was posted to a different part of the country to teach at a remote school for her compulsory service. When she got there, it didn't take long before she settled down and got used to the new environment. It was in this new environment that she met Amaka. Amaka was also a graduate who was posted to teach at the same school as Kemi. They became close friends and started living together as sisters. Unlike Kemi, Amaka rarely bought food outside the house. She would often go to the market to buy foodstuffs and cook them herself. But Kemi didn't know how to cook. As soon as Kemi settled into the new environment, she started exploring the area for street food vendors and restaurants to know which offered the cheapest meals with the best taste. Every single day, she would eat at a different restaurant to taste their food. Amaka observed that Kemi didn't buy any pots or plates for cooking at home and found it very strange that Kemi always preferred eating out and didn't like cooking. One day, Amaka told Kemi, "Don't you know it is safer and cheaper for you to buy things at the market and cook for yourself? Why do you always prefer to waste your money on buying cooked food from outside?" Kemi got offended and answered rudely, "Is it your money? Have I ever asked you for money? How is my life choice your business? Amaka felt she was trespassing, so she apologized to Kemi and told her she was simply trying to look out for her. But no matter what Amaka said, it didn't change Kemi's habit of buying and eating food outside. One fateful day, Kemi and Amaka were on their way back from work when a very handsome and rich young man approached them. Hello, good afternoon. My name is Tunde, the man said. He asked to speak to Kemi privately and told her he liked her. They exchanged numbers and started talking often over the phone. Tunde was a businessman who owned many branches of his company across the country. He would often take Kemi out to fancy, expensive restaurants, and it didn't take long before Kemi fell in love with him. However, one day, Tunde decided to visit Kemi at her home. Kemi welcomed him warmly and bought him a soft drink. As they were talking, Tunde's stomach started grumbling, and he told Kemi he was very hungry. He requested that Kemi cook for him because he wanted to taste her food. He even offered to take her to the market to buy some ingredients. But to his greatest surprise, Kemi told him, "It's a waste of time to cook food. Why don't we place a call to one of those fancy restaurants and order a delicious meal instead?" Tunde refused and insisted that he wanted to taste Kemi's cooking. When Kemi realized that Tunde was very serious, she opened up and confessed, "I'm sorry, Tunde, but I can't cook." Tunde was surprised. Kemi was a very beautiful and classy lady, so he found it very strange that she couldn't cook. He became very disappointed and left Kemi's house abruptly. When Amaka came back home, she found Kemi lying on the bed, looking very sad. She was concerned and asked what the matter was, but Kemi refused to open up to Amaka. Instead, she lied that she had lost some money, and that was why she was sad. She didn't want Amaka to mock her because Amaka had been warning her against buying food outside for a very long time. One afternoon, Kemi was on her way back from work when she noticed a new fancy restaurant along the road. It was a new place, and she had never eaten there before. She admired how beautiful it looked from the outside. The exterior design was luxurious, and it was always filled with customers whenever she passed by. One day, she decided to patronize the restaurant. She walked in and loved what she saw. It was beautifully decorated and classy, yet their food was quite affordable. This must be the reason why there are always so many customers, Kemi thought to herself as she went through the menu. A waiter approached her and asked what she would like to order. She made her order and it was brought to her promptly. The food tasted delicious, and from that day, Kemi became a frequent customer. She ensured she patronized the restaurant daily, and the waiters became familiar with her preferences. Sometimes, when her schedule was tight, she would place a call to the restaurant to deliver food to her office. However, less than a month after Kemi started patronizing the new restaurant, something strange happened. One afternoon, while at work, she ordered food from the restaurant. When the food was delivered, she started eating. But as she was almost done, she saw a dead cockroach inside the food. Kemi was shocked and confused. It was her first time seeing such a thing. Being a street-smart girl who often ate quickly without observing the contents of her food, she was horrified. She couldn't finish the meal and threw the rest away. Still, she foolishly dismissed it as a mistake. A week after the incident, Kemi fell seriously ill and was admitted to a hospital. She had a severe fever and diarrhea that almost took her life. After the doctor's diagnosis, He told her the illness was caused by a strange bacteria commonly found in very dirty places. Always make sure your kitchen and cooking environment is clean, the doctor warned. You're very lucky you were admitted on time. This illness is so dangerous, it could have killed you in days. Kemi thanked the doctor before being discharged and placed on medication. When she got back home, Amaka became her caregiver. Amaka would cook and ensure Kemi ate nutritious meals. But when Kemi fully recovered, she reverted to her old habits of buying food outside. To make matters worse, she continued patronizing the same restaurant where she had found the cockroach. It didn't take long before she fell sick again and had to visit the hospital for a second time. However, it was after her third illness that Kemi decided to investigate why she was always falling sick after eating at the restaurant. The restaurant looked neat and luxurious from the outside, and she felt there was no room for dirt in such a place. One fateful weekend, Kemi went to the restaurant in the afternoon. She ordered her usual meal, but this time she didn't eat it quickly like she used to. She carefully observed each portion of rice she scooped, ensuring it wasn't contaminated. When she was done eating, she pretended to be pressed and asked the waiter to point her in the direction of the restroom. When she got to the restroom, it was already occupied, so she decided to use the opportunity to look around the restaurant. As she ventured further down the hall, she noticed a swinging door that led to the kitchen. She peeped through the door and was shocked by what she saw. The kitchen was filthy. There were a lot of dirty dishes piled up beside the cooking area. Raw meat was left out in the open, with dozens of flies perched on it. The women who were cooking had dirty hair, and their white aprons were stained with all sorts of things. It looked as if they hadn't been washed in months. The floor was covered in filth, and rats were roaming freely all around. Then Kemi saw the chief cook, a very fat, dark woman wearing a sleeveless gown. Her teeth were brown, and the hair on her armpits was bushy and disgusting. Kemi watched in horror as the woman scratched her dirty armpit with the same spoon she was using to stir the soup. She didn't even bother to wash the spoon afterward. Kemi felt like throwing up. She quickly ran back to the restaurant and sat on her chair, pretending like nothing had happened. Her stomach churned as she realized that many other restaurants might be the same way, even the ones she considered very clean and trustworthy. She thought about all the restaurants she had visited and the countless meals she had eaten. She began to wonder if they were all the same. When Kemi got home, she was deeply ashamed of herself. She wished she had listened to Amaka's advice in the past. That day, she made a decision she would start making her own meals. Kemi cleaned out her kitchen space, went online to learn how to cook, and then headed to the market to buy cooking utensils and ingredients. When she returned home that evening, Amaka was shocked to see Kemi in the kitchen. Amaka quickly changed into her house clothes and joined Kemi. Together, they prepared a meal. The food didn't look as beautiful and fancy as the ones Kemi used to buy at restaurants, but it tasted delicious. Most importantly, Kemi knew it was prepared with proper hygiene and care. Kemi continued learning how to cook through the internet and with help from Amaka. She stopped eating out and started taking home cooked meals to work. Her colleagues were surprised to see Kemi bringing her meals to the office, and some even joined her during lunch. Eventually, Tunde returned. He apologized to Kemi for leaving her abruptly after finding out that she couldn't cook. "I should have advised and supported you instead of walking away," he admitted. The two reconciled, and after a few months, they got married. Kemi's story highlights the importance of health, hygiene, and personal growth. Here on our channel, we aim to inspire change and self awareness through impactful stories. Like, share, and subscribe for more content that adds value to your journey. Thank you for watching.